Welcome to SHOWstudio Head to Head. Last head to head of the season. We're in Paris now, autumn-winter 18, discussing the last week of the past months of collection, again with the unique and inimitable Stephen Jones, who is today wearing a fantastic hat.
Yeah, it's a Dior cap. It's a bit of a vintage Dior cap, actually.
When did that happen? When did you make it?
This was during time of John at Dior. I think this must be about 12 years old now. Yeah.
It's still gorgeous, and people cannot see it in color, but it's very lively, very summery, and full of
it's
colors.
a very summery day today, so I thought this could be good.
Well done. Thank you for being back.
Yeah.
So, Stephen, we're talking about Paris, which is where you probably have the most important collection of the season, but let's not start with Dior for once. I totally fell for the Undercover show. I know that I'm not the only one who said it, but I rewatched it yesterday with the music, it was just incredible. And for me, what was incredible, apart from the clothes that were, some of them were really amazing, was this not appropriating the youth culture, but giving to it. I had the feeling that it was interpreting what young people need, what young people want. He had this Asian gaze on the Western culture of teenagers, and you know, we are infinite, and the music, I can go on and on and on, so you have to stop me. But what did you think? Did you like it as much?
I thought it was a fantastic collection. You know, Jun Takahashi, the designer, is really clever. He's really... we were talking in the last show about an outsider's perception is sometimes more accurate than an insider's perception. And I think his entire life has been, you know, fascinated by Western culture. I knew him many, many years ago when he was the lead singer of a band. He was the lead singer of a tribute band. He was called Johnny-O, and his band was called the Tokyo Sex Pistols. And I knew him when he was about 16 and 17. He was a very good friend of a friend of mine.
So where was he living?
In Japan.
Okay.
But he came to stay with me in London in my flat in
So
Camden.
he's an intimate friend of
Yeah, so I really know him quite well. I don't know him as well now, but certainly then. And he's always been fascinated by Western culture and things from the outside. So it's interesting, when a designer is designing, the thing that they have to offer really is themselves and their own character.
Yes.
That's all they have. But then they have a perception on the outside world as well, and that outside world could be Tudor design from Europe, or it could be space age, or it could be contemporary street fashion. And he's very good at combining the third person and the first person. I love this show. I love this show in this whole repertoire of shows that he has done. If we think back to the Winter 17 show, which was extraordinary takes on very grand haute couture, you know, more Dior than Dior, more Balenciaga than Balenciaga, with long dresses and sculptural tops. It's the complete opposite.
Sorry, I'm interrupting you, but what's interesting also is that when I first watched it quickly on, you know, just the photos when you're following the shows, I was like, what's there? And then I started going into detail, and I started really looking at the clothes, you know, those there is a certain point, it looks like a tuxedo, and actually it's a sweatshirt, you know, there's...
Oh yeah, the fabrics are extraordinary.
But it's a way, that's why I said it was giving to teenagers, because it was giving them something more creative than just a sweatshirt. Yeah. And I know I'm not saying anything that changes the world, but fashion-wise, that was very interesting, and it was very sweet the way he did it. Like, you know, the actress from Stranger Things, Sadie Sink, I think. She's not the one that everybody asked to do, you know, she wasn't the protagonist, she was this teenager that happened in the second season and was the love interest. I mean, there was something, I don't know, it was really extraordinary. And those beanies.
Yeah,
these was sparkling and
maybe my favorite hats of the season, because I love the fact that they were just, most of them were beanies. There were some sort of baseball caps too, but...
I'm less keen on baseball caps.
It's so funny, baseball caps. There's half the people in the world who hate them, half the people in the world who love them.
Well, I'm, you know.
You're the one side of the table that hates them. I'm this side of the table that loves them. I mean, for example, those pictures we were looking at just then.
Yes.
I think also it's so interesting. One of his Undercover's great supporters and the person, I believe, who paid for his first shows in Paris was Ray Kawakubo. And he showed under the Comme des Garçons sort of umbrella. Yeah. And when you see those little striped jackets, I mean, they're gorgeous, but they're very much within the language of Ray. And the little tie, it's
so it was like a
combination of
work?
I don't know, skate culture, Japanese take on preppy Western school uniforms.
Well, that's very interesting because, again, yesterday when I was re-watching it, I thought exactly that. It starts with, you know, like jeans and sweats, and then it goes, and that's one type of teens, and then it goes into the preppier ones with the collegiate shoes and the striped blazers, and then it goes into things that could be conceived for evening, and then it goes into the cool kids. I mean, it was
a huge show, by the way. I think there was 83 outfits.
It never stopped. It was like 20 minutes.
Yeah. It was something like 83 outfits, which is really a lot because that's very expensive to do. When you think that Comme des Garçons probably showed 25 outfits, and Armani, actually Dolce & Gabbana showed 120 or something like that. They do the bigger shows of anybody.
Yeah, and Carl also,
and Chanel,
it's quite long.
That's huge.
But it was long, but I also think it was thought particularly well. Like there was Hero by Bowie at a certain time that was making people shiver, and then this poem read, this voice, I admit I didn't look into it, I don't know exactly what it was, but you know, this man voice telling the story of these young people saying why they're there and what they do. I don't know, I think that if you want to be political, or if you want to talk to the new generation, that was the way to do it. Mm-hmm. And I don't think there was in any way any appropriation, which was very good.
Yeah, I mean, all this discussion about appropriation, it's all appropriation, whether it's, I mean, unless you were going to be only technical, and the only person who's ever really done that is Charles James, when he was really designing.
Sorry, what do you mean by only technical?
So whether it's, you know, and developed on the human body as a sequence of measurements or curves or lines or something which relate geometrically to the human body and related to fabric, which is about clothing. Very, very, very few designers do that. All of clothing is meaning, all is appropriation, all of it has something from somewhere. You're wearing this shirt. You know, why has it got a collar on? Technically, that shirt does not have to have a collar because it means something. It's a reference to a man's shirt. Why has it got those patch pockets? That's reference, you know, to a military shirt, but in a very, very light way. And of course, it's made lighter by the fact it's got pale buttons on. So, you know, I could sit and analyze that shirt for 15 minutes. Every single piece of clothing comes from, of course, some cultures are subjugated by other cultures. That's where the problems lie. But I would say 95% of fashion design is appropriation.
I also think that there is this tendency by the public or by the press sometimes to, that's not going to go down well, but to need a narrative, and so...
Oh yes, like appropriation is the new luxury.
Why,
or it's the, you know,
why did they put a hat that, you know, appropriate the Sikh culture for Gucci, or that one is copying that one? I mean, there's sometimes like, okay, let's enjoy, enjoy the show. Yeah. But we need to be able to fill these half hours of head-to-head and discuss something, don't we?
Yeah, I was very, naturally very fascinated by people saying, well, they appropriated Sikh turbans.
Yes.
From what I understand, he was inspired by Sikh
taxi drivers
in New York. And they did ask some Sikh people what they thought, and they said, well, yes, it is a religious symbol, but as long as you're doing it sort of out of respect, and you're not making fun of it, you know, it is fine. It is not such a big problem for us. But I think it's often a question of people sort of mixing it up and not being, I mean,
especially attacking the successful ones.
Yeah, for example, when I made turbans for Marc Jacobs for this summer, there were some people who were saying, you know, I'm taking African-American symbol of African-American culture. Well, actually, no, every culture in the world takes a piece of cloth and wraps it around their head. It's one of the most basic things that you can do, in the same way that you could take a scarf and put it around your body to keep yourself warm. The same thing happens on the head, so it's not associated with one culture. But it's just the buzzword of the moment, and you know, is appropriation the new black?
It's a trendy word of the moment, exactly.
I don't know, maybe.
But anyway, so this is for Undercover, which for me was one of the shows of the season, actually. Just incredible. Let's move on, and I would like to have a word about Loewe. I'm a great fan of what JW Anderson has done with his brand first, and then with this brand that for some years struggled to be, you know, another Celine or another Fendi success. You know, it's been, they couldn't really find their place.
I mean, when Stuart
Webers did a good job.
He did a good job, but it was almost transition.
And he wasn't as successful as at Coach.
No.
And at Coach, it shows how good he is. And anyway, so comes this young British talent, quite brave choice by the LVMH people, and he does an incredible job, which is still going on. Apparently the figures show he did a good job holistically, you know, the stores, the campaigns, the clothes, everything around it. This show was, for me, particularly interesting because it was, as he said, take things off, make it simple, make it clothes. He said something like, at the end of the day, they're clothes and people need to be able to wear them. Yet there is fashion in there, which we still want and need. Apart from telling me what do you think about this show, but also, is this brand suffering from the effort it's putting into Loewe? What is this, you know, dynamic between having two big, successful brands to work with?
I think it's very difficult for any designer. If you're doing two labels, it's almost impossible. I remember very many years ago, when I was working with Claude Montana in the 80s, he was actually the first designer who had started to work at another fashion house as well as he worked at Lanvin and had two incredibly successful years there. But they wanted him to design the pret-a-porter as well, and he only designed the haute couture. It was Meryl Lanvin, the sort of granddaughter of the original founder, who was the designer there. And he said, well, you actually cannot divide your allegiances between your own label and somebody else, because one will falter, and that's why he stopped doing it, because he...
So he refused?
He refused to do the pret-a-porter. He only did the haute couture. And it's always very difficult. You know, look at Alexander McQueen when he was at Givenchy and doing his own label, when John was doing his own brand and at Dior. It's always very, very difficult. Even Demna, you know, between Balenciaga and Vetements, it's very difficult because you have to produce so much, and people will always say, well, there are similarities, but you are one person with and you have basically one point of view.
I still think that Jonathan is very good at separating, you know, the style, the DNA, whatever you want to call it, of the two different brands.
And I think Loewe is a really interesting label, because what people don't remember is the fact that it's a Spanish label, it's not a French label, and it's a huge label in Spain with a very big and strong history. And in a way, he's worked against that to force it to come into the modern world of international fashion, but he's sort of also embraced it because the leather goods are really good and he's had a really big success. Do you know what the sales figures are? Leather goods versus pret-a-porter?
In Loewe, no. I don't. First of all, you know, LVMH, they don't really release precise figures, so we don't even know.
But is it a balance like Louis Vuitton that it's?
No, balance, not a balance. Like Louis Vuitton
is huge.
But it's apparently 12% of a huge figure. But you know, Louis Vuitton sells probably 60% of canvas, LV canvas. So I don't know, but I'm sure that they're selling. He created a few extraordinary bags that sold
which
very
are
well.
wonderful.
So I'm sure that as usual, you know, the fashion, the ready to wear is supporting the sales of because we all know that a fragrance or a bag sells very well not only for what it is, but because of the buzz that is created thanks to the ready to wear. So I'm sure it's not very important for them to sell a lot of the suits, but fashion-wise, I think he is one of the best examples of nailing it.
Yeah.
You can like it or not, but he nailed it. You know, there's a lot of leather in the fashion. There is a lot of Spanish, yet non-Spanish culture. To my taste, it's very beautiful. But I wonder. I was less. I don't know. He will hate me to say this, but I wonder if his own brand is. Well, I love what he's done with his own brand, and I wonder. I just couldn't bring myself buying anything this season. I know it shouldn't be personal, but I think there is something different in the JW Anderson brand now. Or
of course there will be, but I was just thinking about it. JW Anderson, he's the designer, and at Loewe, he's the creative director. In Streetwear, it's two different jobs. If you're a creative director, you are directing a group of people.
Yeah.
Whereas I think in his brand in London, he's designing it. It's him. When he, you know, when he goes through the front door, it's his name above the door. Yeah. So it's about him. It's about him personally.
That's what Lee McQueen used to say. I'm tired, but I can't give up because my name is outside the door.
Yeah. But
memories.
Yeah, memories. So it's a cycle of design, and it's so interesting that, you know, he's there. Bernardano was actually quite a visionary employing him at Loewe, because it was not, as the French say, c'était pas évident. It wasn't
pas évident du tout.
Yeah, for him to go on at Loewe, but he's really made it his own. He's put his own handwriting on it.
They need to date them now.
Yeah. Well.
But yeah, no, I agree. I just hope that JW Anderson brand will continue being what it is, because for me it was one of the first big revelation in the new way of doing and consuming and proposing, you know, what we want to wear, and it's one of my favorite brands. So.
Yeah, well, you know what happens is that, I mean, obviously Loewe is big money, big turnover, big distribution, all of that. So it is only natural that for him, he has to service the world of Loewe and do that correct. So he cannot spend as much time on his own brand, but it will come to a point where Loewe has reached a maturity, then he can devote more time and trouble onto his own brand. Yeah. And I think probably LVMH will want him to as well. What's attractive for them is he is this young, hip, fascinating designer.
He's brilliant. Everybody, I've never met him personally, but I mean, first of all, I see what he's doing, and I hear how he's talking, and I read his interviews. But he's obviously a brilliant mind, so he knows what he's doing, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, he really does.
Tom Browne.
Tom Browne.
You eat. Let me talk for 1 second so you can eat. Tom Browne, I said that about Undercover before, but I must say, if we have to talk about someone who wrote subtext, I think Tom Browne did it brilliantly, except that I went to listen to him talk at Saraband last month, and he was denying any subtext. So it was quite interesting hearing Tim trying to make him talk about his meanings, his subtext, and him saying, "Oh no, I just like red," or "Oh no, that was just an idea." So, and I came back to SHOWstudio after that show, and I was like, oh my God, I mean, talk about women power. That was so that was so amazing. I mean, the way it was done, and then he was denying everything. So, am I completely crazy?
No, you're completely correct.
Okay, thank you.
But what you don't get from these pictures was the extraordinary
show itself.
Show. Yeah. I don't know if you have any photographs of the mise en scène of the show layout,
Incredible.
But what it was all these models were being painted having their portraits painted actually in the show.
During the show, yeah.
And there was 30 girls on the runway, and there was 30 girls painting them too, which was, and in fact all the paintings had been done by Tom. Did you?
Oh,
yeah.
That I didn't. Yeah, maybe.
Yeah, all the paintings had been started off by him. So it was an extraordinary layout and how it all worked, and the clothes were super intense as well.
Incredible.
Yeah, I mean it was more haute couture than haute couture.
Yes, that's a good way of saying it. What was your take? I don't remember. Were there hats in it? Did you do something for it?
Yes, in fact, there were. What I did were the 4 dogs. At the end,
exactly.
there is the queen, and she was brought on by her 4 dogs.
It was so powerful. Talk about women power.
And they had full head masks made out of fur, and I made these full head masks. No, there weren't real hats this season.
So tell us about the brief
these dresses, which had panniers and little beige raincoat over the top. These were the painters' outfits.
Okay. Mm-hmm. And can you tell me a little bit more about the brief you got for what you did? Because I'm sure that he's denying a subtext, but he had a very, very, very strong one in his head.
Well, it was about a court painter whose name eludes me.
Did I write it down somewhere? Maybe someone can
well,
help
anyway,
us.
I hope somebody can help us. It was a court painter during the time of Marie Antoinette, and she was a female court painter, and it was the idea of portrayal and how people want to appear versus how people really appear, and the art of beautifying, and how at the end there is a queen and she had to be led on. And you know, in fashion, some of it is, when you're working on a conceptual show, some of it is fed by the past, some of it is fed by the present, some of it is fed by your imagination. But what pops out at the other end of the mental liquidizer is something new and different.
Vigée le bras.
Yeah.
Thank you. Vigée le bras.
Is something which comes out is completely different. And in a funny way, I think it's almost like, what can I say? Tom will probably kill me for saying this, but it's almost like going.
Say it now.
It's almost like going to Disneyland. And if you've ever been on that compelling but strange, I was going to say hideous, but strange ride, because it's a small world. It doesn't really matter what it meant. It's just the experience of seeing it and being there.
Oh, yeah.
And you can look into it as much as you want to, but actually you just have to look at it like that, and like a flat image.
That's what I think he was trying to do in that talk. Because if we didn't know his fashion, I would have thought, why? Why is he almost denying everything that, of course, Tim knows, because he's a fashion critic and he knows Tom Browne and he knows what he's talking about.
No, but I think Tim is equally frustrated by it.
Really?
Yeah, because in a way, Tom's not telling the truth, because in the story that he creates in his head, it's his clothes which are telling the story.
That's what was trying to do, like saying, look at the clothes, don't think about anything else.
Yes, and that's exactly the same process that John does at Margiela. Is, you know, I don't do interviews about it. What you're looking at is the clothes.
Yeah. Why even accept him to do a talk?
And I think, you know, there's so much, people have been talking about it over the past few days, there's so much social media, there's so much communication going on about fashion. Is it necessarily a good thing? Maybe it is not, if you just let the clothes talk.
Especially when you're confronted with a collection like this. I mean, it's just incredibly beautiful and desirable. But I think it goes, especially if someone approached Tom Browne for the first time in this collection, I think whatever was around it helps you understand it and loving it even more.
Yeah. It's so funny. Recently, I've been, within 20th century fashion, there's always Balenciaga and Dior. Balenciaga used to give numbers to his outfits. Yeah. Dior gave names. So you might have a plain black dress from Balenciaga, and it would be number 25. You would have a plain black dress from Dior, and it might be called Mexique, like Mexico. So you could think, well, is this like a night in Mexico, and you're on a terrace, and you put a bougainvillea in your, you know. So there's ways that you can be brought into the experience, and there's ways that it is more simplified.
So that's
and it's
what
just
Balenciaga was doing.
Yes.
Like, look at the clothes.
Yeah,
It's
yeah,
a number.
yeah.
I need a reference when you order it.
Yeah, Balenciaga, which is the same as Rei Kawakubo, doesn't really talk about the collection.
Yeah.
Same as Margiela doesn't really talk about the collection. And those people who really communicate about the collection and talk about it and say, well, it's inspired.
Before closing our last head-to-head of the season, you said to me something very interesting before about Dior calling his bag Miss Dior. I think it's an interesting thing to hear.
Right. So I've been doing a lot of research for Dior recently, and
I saw that on your Instagram.
The way that the reason that the way that Miss Dior was named for a start, they were all sitting around. This is actually before the House of Dior opened. This extraordinary thing, and the first year that they launched the house, they launched the fragrance too, because they knew that was the big money spinner.
So
this is in
modern.
1947,
approach.
and he had an American PR to make Dior for French, to make it more international.
Wow.
Anyway, they were all sitting around trying to think of the name of the new perfume, and Mitzi Bricard, who was his muse and his assistant, his Dior's sister was outside and was coming into the room, and she said in English to Christian Dior, "Oh, here is Miss Dior," and he said, "That's the name for the perfume." Of course, to us, talking...
Oh, the perfume, not the bag.
Yeah,
I call it a bag, but it was a perfume, yeah.
A perfume. And of course to us, because we're speaking in English, Miss Dior sounds very normal. But to a French person, of course, let's say it'd be Mademoiselle Dior, but Miss Dior was that to make it not sound too French, to make it sound international and modern.
So it was a marketing move.
Yeah, so the rest of the world, of course, was trying to be French to make their perfume sound more interesting, or like every beauty brand does. Yeah. Every beauty brand puts the English description of the moisturizer, and then the French one underneath. Yeah. But actually, for a French brand, it was much more interesting to use the sort of American term, English international terminology.
Brilliant marketing move.
Fantastic.
In the 40s.
In 1947.
Well, that's a lesson
1947,
to be learned.
1948.
Thank you so much, Stephen.
My pleasure, Mimma.
And thank you, everybody, for following. This is the last show of the season. See you next season.
See you next season. Bye-bye.